The man on the auction block wore chains around his wrists, but the woman standing beside him wore invisible ones that bound her just as tightly. And Zachary Kane could see it in her hollow eyes from where he sat on his horse at the edge of the crowd in Manassa, Colorado on that scorching afternoon in June of 1878. The auctioneer's voice carried across the dusty town square, shouting numbers and descriptions that made Zachary's stomach turn. He had ridden into town looking for supplies, nothing more, but the sight before him froze him in place. The woman couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and a face that might have been beautiful if not for the despair etched into every feature. Her dress was little more than rags, and bruises marked her pale arms. "Gentlemen, we have here Marianne Reeves, young and strong, able to work hard and worth every penny," the auctioneer declared, his rotund belly straining against his vest as he gestured toward her like she was livestock. "She's being sold to settle the debts of her late father. Starting bid is $50. Zachary felt his jaw clench. He knew about debt bondage, knew it was legal in some circumstances, knew that desperate people ended up in desperate situations. But knowing and seeing were two different things entirely. The woman stood there with her chin up despite everything, a small act of defiance that spoke of a spirit not yet broken. A man in the front row raised his hand. $50. Zachary recognized him immediately. Bull Henderson, a rancher known for working his hired hands into the ground and treating women even worse. Stories circulated about the girls who worked in his household, none of them pleasant. 60, another voice called out. This man Zachary didn't know, but he had the look of someone who frequented saloons and brothels, his smile greasy and his intentions clear. Marianne's face remained impassive, but Zachary saw her hands trembling at her sides. She was trying so hard to be brave, and it was breaking something inside him that he hadn't known could still break. He'd spent the last 5 years building walls around his heart, convinced that loneliness was better than loss, that isolation on his ranch outside town was preferable to risking connection with another human being. 70, Bull Henderson shouted, grinning at the other bidder. Zachary knew he should ride away. He had come to Manassa for flour and coffee, not to involve himself in other people's troubles. His ranch was struggling enough as it was, cattle prices being what they were, and he had barely enough saved to make it through the winter. Taking on another person would be foolish, impractical, and potentially ruinous. 80, the greasy man countered. Marianne's eyes swept across the crowd, and for just a moment they landed on Zachary. In that brief connection, he saw fear she was desperately trying to hide, saw resignation mixed with a tiny flicker of hope that someone, anyone, might save her from this nightmare. Her gaze moved on, not expecting anything from the lone cowboy on the dusty brown horse, but the damage was done. Zachary urged his horse forward before he could talk himself out of it. $200, he called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Every head turned toward him. The auctioneer's eyes widened with greed and surprise. Bull Henderson's face darkened with anger, and the greasy man looked disappointed but not willing to go higher. $200 was more than most men in this town made in 6 months. $200 from the gentleman on the horse, the auctioneer said eagerly. Do I hear 250? 250, anyone? Bull Henderson looked like he wanted to continue, but even he wasn't foolish enough to spend that kind of money. He glared at Zachary with pure venom before spitting in the dust and stalking away. The greasy man had already melted back into the crowd, going once, going twice, sold to the cowboy for $200. Zachary dismounted and walked toward the platform, his heart hammering in his chest. What had he just done? $200 was nearly everything he had saved. It was his safety net, his insurance against disaster, his hope for expanding his herd next spring. And he just spent it on a woman he didn't know, for reasons he couldn't fully explain even to himself. He counted out the money to the auctioneer, each bill feeling like a piece of his security floating away. The auctioneer handed him a piece of paper, a certificate of debt transfer that made Zachary feel sick to hold. Marianne was led down from the platform, and suddenly she was standing in front of him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Let's go," he said quietly, not knowing what else to say. She followed him to his horse without a word. He noticed she walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. How long had she been standing on that platform? How long had she been trapped in whatever situation had led her here? He wanted to ask but didn't know how. Zachary helped her up onto his horse before mounting behind her. She sat stiffly, her back rigid, not leaning against him even though the horse's gait would have made it more comfortable. He understood. She didn't know him, had no reason to trust him, had just been purchased like property. The whole situation was wrong in ways that made his chest tight with anger at a world that allowed such things. They rode out of Manassa in silence, heading west toward his ranch. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and he could feel sweat trickling down his back beneath his shirt. His ranch was about an hour outside of town, a modest spread with a small house, a barn and grazing land that stretched toward the mountains. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned through 5 years of backbreaking work after he'd left his family's farm in Kansas. "What's your name?" Marianne finally asked, her voice rough as if she hadn't used it in days. "Zachary Kane. Most people call me Zach." "Zachary," she repeated softly like she was testing how it felt. "I suppose you know mine already. Marianne Reeves, not that it matters much now." "It matters," he said firmly. "Your name matters." She didn't respond to that, but he felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. They continued riding, the only sounds the rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves and the whisper of wind through the prairie grass. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat in the valleys. "Why did you do it?" Marianne asked suddenly. "Why did you spend that money on me?" Zachary didn't answer right away. He'd been asking himself the same question since the moment the words had left his mouth. The truth was complicated, layered with reasons he didn't fully understand himself. "Couldn't let you go to Henderson," he finally said. "Or that other fellow. They would have made your life hell. And you won't." There was no accusation in her voice, just honest curiosity mixed with wariness. "No," he said simply. "I won't." "Then what do you want from me?" It was a fair question. He just bought her debt, which meant legally she owed him labor until the debt was worked off. He could demand anything and the law would support him. The thought made him feel ill. "I haven't figured that out yet," he admitted, "but I'm not going to hurt you or force you into anything. I give you my word on that." "The word of a stranger," she said quietly, but there was less edge to it than before. "It's all I have to offer right now." They fell silent again. Zachary found himself acutely aware of her presence in front of him, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the subtle scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite everything. He wondered who she had been before her father died, before debt and circumstance had led her to that auction block. Had she been happy? Had she laughed easily? Did she have dreams that had been crushed under the weight of survival? His ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. The house was small but sturdy, built from logs and stone with a covered porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. The barn stood nearby, weathered wood that needed paint he couldn't afford. His dozen cattle grazed in the distance, and his 2 other horses stood in the corral, raising their heads to watch the newcomers arrive. It's not fancy, Zachary said, suddenly self-conscious about his modest home. But it's clean and the roof doesn't leak. It's more than I expected, Marianne said, and he heard surprise in her voice. Whatever she'd been imagining, this apparently wasn't it. He dismounted first, then helped her down. She winced when her feet hit the ground, and he realized her shoes were little more than scraps of leather held together with string. His anger at her circumstances flared again, hot and protective in a way that surprised him. "Come inside," he said. "You must be hungry and thirsty." She followed him onto the porch and through the front door. The interior of his house was sparse but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and two smaller rooms off to the side for sleeping. He'd built most of the furniture himself, simple but functional. "There's a pump in the kitchen," he said, gesturing toward the back. "Water's cold and clean. Bedroom on the right is yours. I'll take the one on the left." Marianne turned to stare at him. "You're giving me my own room, of course. Where else would you sleep? I assumed." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear enough. "No," Zachary said firmly, meeting her eyes. "That's not what this is. You'll have your privacy and your own space. I meant what I said about not forcing you into anything." For the first time, he saw her facade crack just a little. Her eyes grew bright with unshed tears, and she blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure. "I don't understand. Why did you buy my debt if you don't want anything from me?" "I want you to be safe," he said quietly. "That's all. Nobody does something like this for nothing. There has to be a reason." Zachary ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to find words for feelings he'd kept buried for years. 5 years ago, I lost someone. Her name was Sarah, and we were supposed to be married. She died of fever 2 weeks before the wedding. After that, I came out here, built this place, kept to myself. I told myself being alone was better than risking that kind of pain again. He paused, looking out the window at the land he'd worked so hard to build. "But when I saw you on that platform today, saw the fear in your eyes and the way you were trying so hard to be brave, something in me just couldn't walk away. Maybe I'm tired of being alone. Maybe I saw a chance to do something good in a world that feels pretty short on good these days. I don't have all the answers, Marianne. I just know that leaving you there would have haunted me for the rest of my life." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Marianne stood there, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, and Zachary felt his own throat tighten. He hadn't spoken about Sarah to anyone in 5 years, had kept that pain locked away so deep he sometimes managed to forget it was there. "My father was a good man," Marianne finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a merchant in Denver, and we had a comfortable life. But he made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people, and when he died 6 months ago, I discovered everything was gone. More than gone. There were debts I never knew about. The creditors came, took our house, everything we owned. I tried to find work, but it wasn't enough to cover what was owed. Eventually, they said I had no choice but to work off the debt. They sent me here to Manassa and put me up on that block like I was a horse or a piece of furniture." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "I thought my life was over. I thought I would end up in some terrible situation with no way out. And then you made that bid, and I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified." "You don't have to be terrified," Zachary said gently. "I know you have no reason to trust me yet, but I hope in time you'll see I mean what I say." She nodded, still crying, but there was something different in her expression now. Hope, maybe, tentative and fragile as new grass after a fire. "Let me show you your room," he said. "Then I'll make us some dinner. Nothing fancy, but I can cook well enough to keep us from starving." He led her to the bedroom on the right. It was small but had a real bed with a thick mattress, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. He'd built the bed frame himself, carved with simple patterns during long winter nights when there was little else to do. This was supposed to be for. He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. For Sarah when she came here as his bride. The room had sat empty for 5 years, a monument to dreams that died before they could bloom. Marianne looked around the room, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I haven't had my own room since my father died. It's yours now. There's a lock on the door too, if that makes you feel safer." She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since they'd met. He wondered what she saw. He was 30 years old, tall and lean from hard work, with brown hair that needed cutting and eyes that his mother used to say were too serious for someone so young. 5 years of mostly solitary life hadn't made him more sociable, but he hoped she could see he was being honest with her. "Thank you," she said, and the weight of meaning in those 2 words made his chest ache. He left her to settle in and went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. His cooking skills were limited but serviceable. He started beans soaking, sliced salt pork to fry, and mixed up biscuit dough. Simple fare, but filling. As he worked, he tried to process everything that had happened. This morning he'd woken up alone, as usual, planning another day of solitary work. Now there was a woman in his house, someone who would be sharing his space and his life, at least for a while. The thought should have terrified him, should have made him want to retreat back into the safe isolation he'd built so carefully. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation, maybe, or the first stirrings of hope that life might hold more than just work and survival. Marianne emerged from the bedroom about 20 minutes later. She'd washed her face and hands and tried to tame her hair, though she had no brush or pins to work with. Even exhausted and worn, there was a natural grace to her movements that caught his attention. "Can I help?" she asked. "Biscuits are almost ready to go in the oven. You could set the table if you'd like. Plates are in that cupboard, utensils in the drawer." They worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the small kitchen. It felt strangely domestic, this simple routine of preparing a meal together. Zachary couldn't remember the last time he'd had company for dinner, let alone someone helping him cook it. When everything was ready, they sat down at his small wooden table. The food was simple but hot and plentiful. Zachary noticed Marianne eating slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the meal might disappear if she moved too fast. "You can have as much as you want," he said gently. "There's plenty." "When was the last time you ate?" he asked after watching her methodically clean her plate. "Yesterday morning. They gave us bread and water." His hands clenched into fists under the table. The anger he felt wasn't directed at her, but at the system that had treated her so poorly, at the men who had seen her as nothing more than property to be bought and sold. "That won't happen here," he said firmly. "You'll never go hungry in this house, I promise you that." After dinner, they cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying dishes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink visible through the kitchen window. Zachary found himself stealing glances at Marianne when he thought she wasn't looking, trying to reconcile the defeated woman on the auction block with the person standing beside him now, who was slowly starting to show glimpses of who she really was beneath the trauma. "I should tend to the horses," he said when the last dish was dried and put away. "You're welcome to come with me if you'd like, or you can rest. It's been a long day." "I'll come," she said. "I've been sitting and standing still for so long it feels good to move." They walked out to the barn together, the evening air cooling rapidly the way it did in Colorado, even in summer. His horses nickered softly when they entered, and Zachary introduced each one to Marianne like they were old friends. Thunder was his riding horse, the one they'd taken into town. Lightning was Thunder's brother, nearly identical in coloring. And the third was Daisy, a gentle mare he'd bought intending to breed but never gotten around to. "They're beautiful," Marianne said, reaching out tentatively to stroke Thunder's nose. The horse leaned into her touch, and she smiled for the first time since Zachary had met her. The transformation was remarkable. When she smiled, truly smiled, her whole face lit up, and he could see the beautiful, vibrant woman she must have been before circumstances had beaten her down. "Do you know how to ride?" he asked. "My father taught me when I was young, but it's been years. We couldn't afford to keep horses in Denver. Maybe I can teach you again if you'd like. Daisy here is patient and gentle, good for someone getting back into it." "I'd like that," she said softly, still petting Thunder. "I'd like that very much." They finished the evening chores as the last light faded from the sky. Stars began appearing overhead, more stars than anyone could see in a city, spread across the heavens like someone had spilled diamonds on black velvet. Zachary had always loved this time of evening, the quiet peace of it, but sharing it with someone made it even better. Back in the house, they stood awkwardly in the main room, neither quite sure how to navigate this strange new situation they found themselves in. "I usually wake up early," Zachary said. "Around dawn, but you can sleep as long as you need to. I'll make coffee when I get up." "What will you want me to do?" Marianne asked. To work off the debt, the question made him uncomfortable. He'd been trying not to think about the legal reality of their situation, about the paper that said she owed him labor in exchange for the money he'd paid. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I suppose the house could use a woman's touch, and there's always work to be done around a ranch. But I'm not going to treat you like a servant, Marianne. We'll figure something out that feels fair to both of us." "How long will it take?" she asked quietly. "To work off $200. I don't care about that. Take as long as you need. Stay as long as you want. Leave if you decide you'd rather be somewhere else. I'm not going to hold that paper over your head like a threat." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Disbelief, maybe, mixed with something softer. "You're a strange man, Zachary Kane." "I've been called worse," he said with a slight smile. "I meant it as a compliment. Then I'll take it as one." She moved toward her bedroom door, then paused. "Zachary, yes. Why didn't you fight?" "When you told me about Sarah, about losing her, most men would have become bitter and angry. But you're not." "Why?" He thought about her question, trying to find the truth in it. "I was bitter for a while. Angry at God, at the world, at the fever that took her. But eventually I realized that carrying all that anger was just another kind of death. Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to live that way. So I came out here, built something with my hands, and tried to find peace in the work and the land. I'm not sure I succeeded, but I tried." "I think you succeeded more than you realize," Marianne said softly. "Good night, Zachary." "Good night, Marianne." He lay awake in his own bed for a long time that night, listening to the familiar sounds of his house and the unfamiliar presence of another person breathing in the room next door. His life had changed completely in the span of a single afternoon, and he had no idea what the future would bring. But for the first time in 5 years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow, to seeing what would unfold, to learning more about the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Zachary woke before the sun as usual, dressed quietly, and went to start coffee. He was surprised to find Marianne already in the kitchen, dressed in the same worn dress from yesterday, her hair braided neatly down her back. "I heard you moving around," she explained. "I hope you don't mind." "Of course not. This is your home too now." The word home seemed to affect her. Her eyes grew bright, but she blinked rapidly and turned her attention to the coffee pot. They made breakfast together, falling into the same easy partnership they'd discovered the night before. Bacon and eggs, more biscuits, and strong black coffee. Simple food but satisfying. "I need to ride out and check on the cattle today," Zachary said as they ate. "Make sure none have wandered off or gotten into trouble. You're welcome to come with me or stay here and rest or explore the area." "Whatever you'd like." "I'd like to come," she said immediately. "If that's all right. I don't want to be alone just yet." "Of course. We'll take Thunder and Daisy. It'll be a good chance for you to get comfortable on a horse again." After breakfast, they walked out to the barn together. The morning air was crisp and cool, promising another hot day, but not there yet. Birds sang in the cottonwood trees near the creek that ran through his property, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out. Zachary saddled both horses, showing Marianne the process and letting her help where she could. Her hands were small and delicate, but he noticed calluses on her palms. She'd known hard work before everything fell apart. "Ready?" he asked, offering his cupped hands to help her mount. She nodded, placing her foot in his hands and swinging up into the saddle with more grace than he'd expected. Muscle memory, maybe, from her childhood lessons. Daisy stood calmly, the perfect horse for someone getting reacquainted with riding. They rode out together, Zachary on Thunder and Marianne on Daisy, heading toward the grazing lands where his cattle spent their days. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth and bringing out the scents of sage and grass. Mountains stood in the distance like patient guardians, and the sky stretched endlessly overhead. "How long have you had this place?" Marianne asked as they rode. 5 years, almost to the day. I bought it with money I'd saved working other ranches, plus what I inherited when my parents died. It wasn't much to start with, just the land and a half-collapsed cabin. I rebuilt the house from the ground up, built the barn, bought my first few cattle. Every year I've tried to add a little more, grow the herd, improve the property. It's slow work, but it's mine. You should be proud." "It's a beautiful place." "I am proud," he admitted. "Even if it's not as successful as I'd hoped. Cattle prices keep dropping, and between paying for feed in winter and hoping disease doesn't strike, it's a constant struggle to stay ahead. That $200 I spent yesterday, that was supposed to be my emergency fund. Now I'm back to living season to season." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have spent that money on me." "Don't," he said firmly but gently. "I made that choice freely and I don't regret it. We'll figure it out together." They found the cattle grazing peacefully in a valley with good grass and access to the creek. Zachary counted them carefully, noting that all were present and looked healthy. It wasn't a large herd, just a dozen head, but they were good stock, and he had hopes of building it up over time. "They're beautiful," Marianne said, watching the cattle with interest. "I never really saw them up close before, living in the city. They're a lot of work, but good animals. Come on, let me show you the rest of the property." They spent the morning riding, and Zachary showed her the boundaries of his land, the best spots for fishing in the creek, the grove of aspen trees that turned gold in autumn. He found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her stories about his first winter here, about learning through trial and error how to manage a ranch, about the time a bear had gotten into his supplies and he'd had to chase it off with nothing but a frying pan and a lot of yelling. Marianne laughed at that story, a real genuine laugh that rang out across the prairie like music. The sound did something to Zachary's heart, made it feel lighter than it had in so long. He realized he'd do just about anything to hear that laugh again. They stopped by the creek for lunch, sitting in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Zachary had packed bread and cheese along with apples from the tree near his house. The water burbled past them, clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. "Can I ask you something?" Marianne said after they'd been eating in comfortable silence for a while. Anything. Yesterday, when you bid on me, you said you'd been asking yourself why. But last night you gave me an answer about not being able to walk away. Which one is the truth? Zachary considered her question carefully. Both, I suppose. In the moment, I didn't think about it at all. I just acted on instinct. Later, trying to understand why I'd done it, I came up with that explanation about loneliness and wanting to do something good. But maybe the real truth is simpler than that. What do you mean? Maybe I saw someone who needed help, and I had the ability to help them, and it really is that straightforward. Everything else, the reasons and explanations, maybe those are just ways of trying to make sense of something that doesn't need to be complicated. Or maybe, Marianne said softly, some part of you recognized that we both needed saving. Me from that auction block, and you from a life you'd convinced yourself was enough when it really wasn't. Her words struck him like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they were so accurate it was startling. He stared at her, this woman he'd known for less than 24 hours, and wondered how she could see through him so clearly. Maybe, he agreed quietly. Maybe you're right. They rode back to the house in the early afternoon, both of them comfortable enough on horseback now that conversation flowed easily. Marianne told him about growing up in Denver, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father's merchant business and how proud he'd been of building something from nothing. The pain in her voice when she talked about her father's death was raw, and Zachary found himself wanting to take that hurt away, to somehow make things better. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Zachary would wake early and start the coffee, and Marianne would join him shortly after. They'd make breakfast together, then tackle the day's work side by side. She proved to be capable and hardworking, learning quickly and never complaining even when the tasks were difficult or unpleasant. She took over the vegetable garden he'd been neglecting, coaxing life back into the wilted plants. She cleaned the house until it shone, organized his chaotic collection of tools and supplies, and even started mending his clothes, which had been held together by increasingly desperate patches. But more than the practical help, what surprised Zachary most was how much he enjoyed her company. They talked while they worked, about everything and nothing. She told him stories about life in the city, and he told her about ranch life and the natural world around them. They debated philosophy and politics, discovered shared opinions on some things and vastly different views on others. They laughed together, worked together, and slowly, carefully, began to trust each other. 2 weeks after Marianne arrived, Zachary rode into Manassa for the supplies he'd originally needed that fateful day. He left early in the morning, promising to be back by evening. The ride into town felt different now, knowing someone was waiting for him at home. He caught himself hurrying through his errands, eager to get back. At the general store, he bought flour, coffee, sugar, and a few other necessities. On impulse, he also purchased fabric, pretty blue cotton that matched Marianne's eyes, along with needles and thread. Her dress was falling apart despite her attempts to mend it, and she needed something better to wear. He had no idea if she could sew, but it seemed like a good thought. "That's a nice choice," the shopkeeper's wife said, nodding at the fabric. "Making something for someone special." "For a friend," Zachary said, not quite ready to explain the situation. Must be a good friend buying fabric that color. Brings out the eyes. He left the store feeling oddly self-conscious, like he'd revealed too much. But the feeling faded as he loaded his purchases and began the ride home. Friend. Was that what Marianne was? It felt like too small a word for what was developing between them, but he didn't have a better one yet. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains when he rode up to his house and found Marianne sitting on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl. She looked up at his approach and smiled, that beautiful bright smile that made his heart skip. And he knew with sudden absolute certainty that he was falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified him. He'd sworn never to let himself be vulnerable like that again, never to risk the kind of pain that came from losing someone you loved. But looking at Marianne, seeing the way her face lit up at his return, he couldn't find it in himself to be afraid. For the first time in 5 years, the prospect of loving someone felt like a beginning rather than a countdown to inevitable loss. "How was town?" she asked as he dismounted. "Quiet. I got everything we needed, plus something extra." He retrieved the package with the fabric and handed it to her. She unwrapped it carefully, and her expression when she saw the blue cotton made him glad he'd bought it. "Zachary, this is beautiful, but you shouldn't have spent money on me. You need a new dress. That one's about to fall apart no matter how well you mend it. I thought maybe you could make something from this if you know how to sew." "My mother taught me," she said softly, running her hands over the fabric. "She was a wonderful seamstress. She made all our clothes when I was young." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." "You're welcome." That evening after dinner, Marianne cleared the table and spread out the fabric, examining it carefully and making mental plans. Zachary sat nearby, supposedly reading a book but mostly just watching her work. The lamplight caught in her hair, turning it to burnished mahogany, and her face was focused and peaceful in a way he loved to see. "Zachary," she said without looking up from the fabric, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about Sarah still? About what your life would have been like if she hadn't died?" It was a harder question than it seemed on the surface. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially in the first few years. But lately, I've been thinking about her less and less. I'm not sure if that makes me a terrible person or just human." "It makes you human," Marianne said gently. "You can't grieve forever. She wouldn't have wanted that." "No, she wouldn't have. Sarah believed in living fully, in squeezing every drop of joy out of each day. She would have hated the way I shut myself away for so long." "But you're not shut away anymore," Marianne pointed out, finally looking up at him. "You brought me here. That was the act of someone ready to open his life again." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it was just the act of someone who couldn't stand by and do nothing. Can it be both?" He smiled at that. "I suppose it can." Marianne worked on her dress over the next several evenings, cutting and sewing by lamplight while Zachary kept her company. He loved these quiet evenings, the domestic peace of them, the comfortable silence broken by occasional conversation. Sometimes he would read aloud to her while she worked, books he'd read a dozen times but that were new to her. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories and thoughts and dreams. "What do you want from life, Zachary?" she asked him one evening. "I mean, beyond keeping the ranch going. What are your dreams?" It was a question he hadn't asked himself in years. After Sarah died, he'd stopped thinking about dreams and focused only on survival and work. But Marianne's presence in his life had awakened something in him, made him consider possibilities he'd thought were dead and buried. "I want this place to thrive," he said slowly, thinking through his answer. "I want enough cattle to make a real living, maybe hire some help so it's not quite so much work. I want to improve the house, add on a few rooms, make it more comfortable. I want to plant more trees, maybe start an orchard." He paused, then continued more quietly. "And I want to share it with someone. I spent 5 years convincing myself I was fine alone, but I wasn't. I was just existing, not really living. Having you here, it's shown me what I've been missing." Marianne's hands stilled on her sewing. "What have you been missing?" "Connection, conversation, laughter." The simple pleasure of making dinner with someone instead of for someone. The feeling of coming home to a house that's warm and lived in, not just a place to sleep between work. He met her eyes across the table. "You've brought life back into this house, Marianne. You've brought life back into me." She set down her sewing, her eyes bright with emotion. "You did the same for me. When you bought my debt, I thought I was just trading one form of captivity for another. But you gave me freedom, real freedom, and you asked nothing in return. You gave me a home and safety and respect. You treated me like a person when everyone else saw me as property. I'll never forget that, Zachary. No matter what happens, I'll never forget what you did for me." "What do you want to happen?" he asked softly. "You have dreams too, Marianne. What are they?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "I want to feel safe," she said finally. "I want to sleep at night without nightmares about being dragged back to that auction block. I want to wake up in the morning without fear about what the day will bring. I want to build something real and lasting, something that can't be taken away by debt or circumstance." She looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "And I want to find love, real love, with someone who sees me as an equal partner, not as property or a burden or a debt to be paid." "You're not a burden," Zachary said firmly. "And that debt means nothing to me. I wish I'd never taken that paper. I should have torn it up the moment we got here." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I tore it up, you'd feel obligated to leave to prove you weren't taking advantage of my charity. I wanted you to stay, even then, and I was selfish enough to keep that paper as insurance you wouldn't disappear." Marianne stood and walked to the drawer where he kept important documents. She pulled out the paper that represented her debt, brought it to the lamp, and held it to the flame. They watched together as it caught fire, burning away to ash and smoke. "There," she said. "Now I'm staying because I want to, not because of legal obligation." "You want to stay?" His heart was hammering so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. "Yes," she said simply. "I want to stay." The tension between them shifted, becoming charged with something neither of them had been quite ready to acknowledge before. Zachary stood, moving around the table until he was standing in front of her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes, close enough to smell the lavender she'd somehow managed to find and make into soap. "Marianne," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since that first moment in town when you looked at me with such brave desperation. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, but I can't keep pretending what I feel is simple friendship or companionship. You've become essential to me in a way that terrifies and thrills me in equal measure." Her breath caught, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. Zachary's heart sank. He'd said too much, too soon, had scared her with the intensity of his feelings. But then she reached up, placing her palm against his cheek, and he saw tears streaming down her face. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for being saved, that what I felt was gratitude and not love. But it's more than that, so much more. When you look at me, I feel seen for the first time in my life. When you smile at me, it's like sunshine breaking through clouds. You make me feel safe and valued and cherished in ways I didn't even know were possible. Can I kiss you?" He asked, needing permission, needing to know this was what she truly wanted. "Please," she said, and it was all the invitation he needed. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, almost tentative. She responded immediately, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, years of loneliness and hurt melting away in the warmth of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Zachary said. "After Sarah, I thought that part of me was dead." "And I never thought I'd feel this way at all," Marianne replied. "I'd given up on the idea of love, of happiness, of any future beyond survival. You gave me back hope, Zachary. You gave me back my life." They stood there holding each other as the lamp burned low, neither willing to let go, both savoring the moment of finally acknowledging what had been building between them for weeks. Outside, night creatures called to each other, and the wind whispered through the grass. Inside, two lonely people had found each other and were beginning to build something beautiful from the ruins of their separate pasts. The days that followed were some of the happiest of Zachary's life. Nothing about their situation had changed externally. They still worked hard every day, still faced the same challenges of making the ranch successful. But everything felt different now that they'd acknowledged their feelings. There was joy in the work now, pleasure in the small domestic moments that made up their days. Marianne finished her blue dress and wore it for the first time on a Sunday morning. Zachary's breath caught when he saw her. The color did indeed bring out her eyes, and the dress fit her perfectly, showing off her figure in a way the old rags never had. But more than that, she looked happy. The haunted, desperate look that had shadowed her features was gone, replaced by contentment and joy. "You're beautiful," he said, unable to keep the awe from his voice. She blushed, pleased. "You're not so bad yourself, Cowboy." They spent that Sunday doing very little actual work, instead choosing to enjoy each other's company. They rode out to a meadow Zachary had discovered years ago, a hidden valley full of wildflowers and surrounded by aspen trees. They had a picnic lunch and lay in the grass watching clouds drift by overhead, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck them. "I could stay here forever," Marianne said, her head resting on Zachary's shoulder. "This moment, this place, it's perfect." "Then let's do it," he said. "Not forever in this exact spot, since we'd eventually get hungry and cold, but forever together. Marry me, Marianne." She sat up, staring at him with wide eyes. "You're serious. Completely serious." "I know we haven't known each other long, but I also know I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to work this land together, grow old together, face whatever challenges come our way together. Marry me." "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face again, but these were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and hope and commitment into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and grinning like fools. "When?" she asked. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow if we can manage it. I don't want to wait." "Tomorrow sounds perfect." They rode back to the house making plans, giddy with excitement and love. It would be a simple ceremony, they decided, just the two of them and whoever could serve as witnesses. They didn't need anything fancy, didn't need a big celebration. They just needed each other and the commitment they were making. The next morning, they rode into Manassa together. The small town had a church with a minister who agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. They found 2 shopkeepers willing to serve as witnesses, strangers who were nonetheless happy to help a young couple so obviously in love. Marianne wore her blue dress, and Zachary wore his best shirt and pants, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. They stood before the minister in the small church, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, and pledged their lives to each other. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Zachary he could kiss his bride, he did so with a heart so full of love and gratitude he thought it might burst. They were married. After everything they'd both been through, all the pain and loss and loneliness, They'd found each other and were beginning a new chapter together. On the ride back to the ranch, now as husband and wife, Zachary couldn't stop looking at Marianne, still hardly believing this was real. She caught him staring and laughed, that beautiful free laugh he'd come to love so much. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how my life has changed," he said. "A month ago I was alone, convinced I always would be. Now I'm married to the most amazing woman I've ever met." "It hardly seems real." "It's real," she assured him, reaching over to take his hand. "We're real. This is really happening." "I still can't believe you said yes," he admitted. "I'm just a struggling rancher with more dreams than money." "You're the man who saved me," she said firmly. "You're the man who treated me with respect and kindness when no one else would. You're the man who saw me as a person, not property. You're the man I love. Money and success, those things can come and go, but character, true goodness, that's rare and precious. You have it, Zachary." That's why I said yes. That evening they consummated their marriage, coming together with passion and tenderness in equal measure. It was Marianne's first time, and Zachary was careful and patient, putting her comfort above his own needs. When they finally joined together completely, it felt like more than physical connection. It was the final cementing of their commitment to each other, the acknowledgement that they were now one unit facing the world together. Afterward, they lay tangled together in bed, Marianne's head on Zachary's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. "I love you," she said softly. "I don't think I'll ever get tired of saying that." "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I'll never get tired of hearing it." The weeks that followed their marriage were some of the best of their lives. They worked the ranch together as true partners, making decisions jointly and supporting each other through challenges. Marianne proved to have a good head for business, suggesting ways to economize and maximize their resources. Under her management, the household ran more efficiently, and they were able to save a little money despite Zachary's earlier fears. As summer gave way to autumn, they prepared for winter together, working long days to ensure they had enough hay stored for the cattle and enough food put by for themselves. Marianne preserved vegetables from the garden, made jam from wild berries they picked together, and even learned how to smoke meat. The pantry that had been half empty when she arrived was now full of jars and supplies, a testament to her hard work. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Marianne turned to Zachary with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I have something to tell you," she said. His heart jumped. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. Quite the opposite, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Zachary couldn't breathe. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Joy and terror flooded through him in equal measure. A child meant responsibility, meant another mouth to feed, meant everything in their lives would change. But it also meant family, meant hope, meant the future they'd been building together was becoming even more real. "Are you happy?" Marianne asked, anxiety creeping into her voice at his silence. "Happy," he managed. "Marianne, I'm ecstatic. Terrified but ecstatic. We're going to be parents," she laughed with relief. "I was so nervous to tell you, I wasn't sure if you'd be ready." "I don't know if anyone is ever really ready," he admitted. "But I know that I want this child, want to build a family with you. We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." They spent the evening making plans, talking about the baby, imagining what their child would look like and who they would become. Zachary found his hand repeatedly drawn to Marianne's still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing there. Their child, the product of their love. It seemed almost too wonderful to be true. As winter approached, Zachary threw himself into preparing the house for a baby. He built a cradle in the evenings, carving it carefully from seasoned pine and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He added shutters to the windows to keep out winter drafts and reinforce the roof against heavy snow. He wanted everything to be perfect for when their child arrived. Marianne knitted tiny clothes and blankets, her needles clicking away during the long winter evenings. They talked about names, unable to agree but enjoying the discussions nonetheless. They read books about caring for infants, though most of what they learned just emphasized how little they really knew. Winter arrived in force in November, bringing heavy snows that blanketed the ranch in white. Zachary worked hard to keep the cattle fed and the house warm, grateful for the supplies they'd laid in. The isolation that had once felt oppressive now felt cozy. Him and Marianne snug in their house while the world outside froze and slept on Christmas Eve, a particularly fierce blizzard hit. Zachary had just made it back from checking on the cattle when the full force of the storm arrived, turning the world into a whiteout of driving snow and howling wind. He and Marianne huddled by the fire, listening to the wind shake the house. "I'm glad you're here," Marianne said, pressed against his side. "I can't imagine weathering this alone." "You'll never have to weather anything alone again," he promised. "We're in this together for the rest of our lives." The storm lasted 3 days, dumping several feet of snow before finally blowing itself out. When Zachary was finally able to dig out and check on the cattle, he was relieved to find them all alive and reasonably well, huddled together for warmth in the lee of the barn. The rest of winter passed in relative peace. They celebrated Marianne's birthday in January, Zachary surprising her with a music box he'd ordered from Denver months earlier and hidden away. When she opened it and it played a delicate waltz, she cried with happiness and kissed him until they both forgot about everything else but each other. As Marianne's pregnancy progressed, Zachary found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body, the way their child grew and developed. He would spend evenings with his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick and move, marveling at the miracle of it all. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" Marianne asked one evening as they lay in bed, his hand tracing patterns on her swollen stomach. "I don't care," he said honestly. "As long as the baby's healthy and you're safe, that's all that matters to me." "I think it's a boy," she said. "I have a feeling. Then we need to settle on a boy's name." They'd been debating this for months. Marianne wanted to name a son after Zachary, and he wanted to name the baby after her father. Finally, they compromised. If it was a boy, his name would be Marcus Zachary Kane. If it was a girl, she would be Emma Sarah Kane, combining Marianne's middle name with the name of Zachary's first love. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. As the meadows greened and wildflowers began to bloom, Marianne's belly grew round and full. She moved more slowly now, tiring easily, but she remained in good spirits. Zachary did his best to take over the heavier chores, insisting she rest and take care of herself. In early May, on a beautiful morning with birds singing and sunshine streaming through the windows, Marianne woke Zachary with a hand on his shoulder and fear in her voice. "Zachary, it's time. The baby's coming." He was instantly awake, adrenaline flooding his system. "Are you sure? It's not for another few weeks yet. Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them. Fetch Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch. We need help." Zachary dressed in record time and saddled Thunder, riding harder than he'd ever ridden before to reach the Henderson ranch 5 miles away. Despite his distaste for Bull Henderson, the man's wife Martha was known to be an experienced midwife. She took one look at Zachary's panicked face and grabbed her bag without needing explanation. They rode back together, Martha's calm presence helping to steady Zachary's nerves. By the time they arrived, Marianne's contractions were coming regularly. Martha shooed Zachary out of the bedroom, telling him to boil water and stay out of the way. The next several hours were the longest of Zachary's life. He paced the main room, flinching at every cry from the bedroom, feeling utterly helpless. This was beyond his ability to fix or manage. All he could do was wait and pray and hope everything would be all right. Finally, after what felt like days but was actually only about 6 hours, he heard the unmistakable wail of a newborn baby. His heart leapt. The bedroom door opened, and Martha emerged with a smile on her weathered face. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy baby boy, and your wife did wonderfully. You can go in now." Zachary burst into the room to find Marianne propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love and pride that it took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached the bed on shaky legs and looked down at the baby in her arms. The infant had a shock of dark hair and was making little snuffling sounds, his tiny fists waving in the air. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. "Marcus Zachary Kane," Marianne said. "Our son." Zachary reached out with one finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. Marcus immediately gripped it with surprising strength, and something in Zachary's chest cracked wide open. This was his son, his child, a life he and Marianne had created together out of love. "He's beautiful," Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both beautiful. Thank you, Marianne." "Thank you for this gift." "Thank you for saving me," she replied. "For giving me a life where this was possible. I love you so much." "I love you too. Both of you, my family." Martha stayed for a few days, helping Marianne recover and teaching them both how to care for the baby. Marcus proved to be a good baby, nursing well and only crying when he needed something. Zachary was besotted from the first moment, constantly wanting to hold his son, to marvel at his tiny features and imagine what he would become. The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting. Neither Zachary nor Marianne got much sleep, both of them adjusting to the constant demands of an infant. But even in the depths of exhaustion, there was joy. Watching Marianne nurse their son, seeing the tender way she cradled him, filled Zachary with profound gratitude for his life. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a new routine that accommodated their growing family. Zachary would do the morning chores while Marianne fed Marcus. Then he'd take over baby duty while she prepared breakfast. They'd learned to work as a seamless team, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood. Marcus grew rapidly, changing almost daily. By the time summer arrived in full force, he was smiling and cooing, his personality beginning to emerge. He seemed to be a happy baby, content as long as he was fed and had someone nearby to smile at him. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Marcus sleeping in Marianne's arms, she turned to Zachary with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about that day in Manassa?" she asked. "The day you bought my debt." "Sometimes," he admitted. "Why?" "I think about it often, about how that was simultaneously the worst and best day of my life. Worse because of the humiliation and fear standing on that platform like property. Best because it brought me to you. I think about how easily I could have ridden away," Zachary said. "I almost did. If I'd looked away even a second earlier, if I'd convinced myself it wasn't my business, my entire life would be different. I'd still be alone in this house, existing but not really living." "Fate," Marianne said softly. "Maybe it was fate that you rode into town that day, that you looked at the auction at exactly the right moment, that you had the means and the heart to intervene." "I don't know if I believe in fate," Zachary replied, "but I believe in choices. I made a choice that day, maybe the best choice of my life, And you made a choice too to stay to give us a chance to build this life with me. Best choice I ever made, she agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. As the years passed, their ranch prospered. Zachary carefully expanded the herd, and with Marianne's business sense, they began to turn a real profit. They hired help during busy seasons and slowly improved the property. They added rooms to the house as they'd always planned, creating more space for their growing family. Marcus was 3 when his sister Emma arrived, born on a crisp October morning with less drama than her brother's entrance into the world. Emma had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination, making her presence known from day one. Marcus was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help take care of her. 2 years after Emma came another son, Daniel, and 2 years after that a daughter they named Sarah, after the woman whose death had set Zachary on the path that eventually led him to Marianne. They agreed that Sarah's memory deserved to be honored, that she had been an important part of Zachary's journey even though she hadn't lived to complete it. Life with 4 children was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. The house that had once been silent except for the wind was now filled with laughter and crying and the constant noise of family life. Zachary and Marianne were busier than ever, balancing ranch work with raising children, but they did it together, always a team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Marianne back to the meadow where he'd proposed, leaving the children with Martha Henderson for the afternoon. They rode Daisy and Thunder, the same horses from that first day, both now older but still strong. "Remember when it was just us?" Marianne said as they lay in the grass, watching clouds drift by just like they had a decade earlier. "Before babies and chaos and constant motion." "Barely," Zachary said with a laugh. "Seems like a lifetime ago." "Do you miss it? The quiet?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "For about 5 seconds, usually right after someone spills something or starts crying at 3 in the morning. But then I remember what the quiet was like before you, the empty loneliness of it, and I wouldn't trade our chaotic life for anything." "Me neither," she said, rolling over to kiss him. "Though I do appreciate these moments alone with you." "Same," he said, pulling her closer. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and I still can't believe you chose me." "Always you," she said firmly. "From that first day it was always you." They made love in the meadow, just like they had in the early days of their marriage, reconnecting in the physical way that had always been so powerful between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together, listening to birdsong and the rustle of wind through the grass. "Do you think about that day anymore?" Zachary asked. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Marianne said, "but not with fear or sadness anymore. When I think about it now, I remember the moment you placed your bid, the way my whole world shifted in an instant. I remember thinking I was being sold to another stranger who would use me, and then discovering you were nothing like I expected. You gave me everything, Zachary. Freedom, safety, love, family. You gave me a life beyond anything I dared dream of." "You gave me the same," he said. "You brought me back to life when I'd forgotten how to really live. You showed me that love was possible again, that opening my heart didn't mean inevitable pain." "We saved each other," Marianne said simply. "Yes," he agreed. "We did." As the years continued to pass, their children grew and thrived. Marcus became a skilled horseman, often helping his father with the cattle. Emma showed a talent for music and would sit for hours playing the piano they'd eventually saved up to buy. Daniel inherited his father's quiet steadiness and his mother's business sense. Sarah was the baby, spoiled by everyone and growing into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions about everything. Zachary and Marianne grew older together, their love deepening and maturing rather than fading. They had their disagreements and difficult times, as all couples do, but they faced everything together. The foundation they'd built in those early days, based on mutual respect and genuine affection, proved strong enough to weather any storm. On a summer evening when Marcus was 18 and starting to talk about maybe starting his own ranch someday, the family gathered for dinner. It was a loud, chaotic affair as always, with children talking over each other and food being passed in every direction. Zachary sat at the head of the table, Marianne to his right, and looked at the faces of his children, marveling at how time had flown. After dinner, when the children had scattered to various activities, Marianne and Zachary stood on their porch watching the sunset, a nightly ritual they'd maintained for 20 years. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Zachary asked, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Not since this morning," Marianne teased. "I was beginning to wonder." "I love you," he said seriously. "More now than ever, if that's possible. Every year with you has been better than the last. Even the year Emma broke her arm falling out of the barn loft, even that year. Even the year the drought almost ruined us. Even the year Daniel had whooping cough and we thought we'd lose him. All of it, good and bad, I wouldn't change a single moment if it meant not having this life with you." "I love you too," she said, leaning into him. "Thank you for bidding on me that day. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for staying," he replied, "for choosing to build this life with me." They stood there as the sun set, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful together. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to their hard work and partnership. Inside the house, their children laughed and argued and lived, filling the space with life and love. Many more years passed. Their children grew up and started lives of their own. Marcus did indeed start his own ranch, marrying a girl from Manassa and giving Zachary and Marianne their first grandchildren. Emma married a piano teacher from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often. Daniel stayed to help run the family ranch, partnering with his father in expanding the operation. Sarah, the youngest, proved to be the wildest, running off to become a schoolteacher on the frontier before eventually settling down. As grandparents, Zachary and Marianne found new joy in the next generation. There was something magical about watching their children become parents, about holding babies who carried their blood and their legacy forward into the future. When Zachary turned 65, the family threw a big celebration at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren came, filling the house to bursting. There was food and music and laughter, exactly the kind of joyful chaos that had defined their family for decades. That night, after everyone had finally gone to bed or home, Zachary and Marianne sat alone on their porch, exhausted but happy. 42 years, Marianne said wonderingly. "We've been together 42 years, more than half my life." "Best 42 years imaginable," Zachary replied. "Though I still remember the first time I saw you like it was yesterday. You were so brave, trying so hard not to show your fear. And you were so serious, sitting on that horse looking like an avenging angel. I didn't know whether to be terrified or hopeful." "Hopefully both worked out," he said with a smile. "Better than worked out. You gave me a fairy tale, Zachary. A real, true fairy tale where the lonely girl gets rescued by her prince and they live happily ever after." "I'm no prince," he protested. "Just a cowboy who made a good decision one day." "My prince," she insisted. "My hero. My everything." Time continued its inexorable march. They grew older still, their hair turning white, their movements slower but no less purposeful. The ranch was firmly in Daniel's capable hands now, with Marcus helping as much as his own operation allowed. Zachary and Marianne were free to enjoy their twilight years in peace. surrounded by family and the land they'd worked so hard to build into something lasting. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered again. There were more grandchildren now, and even a few great-grandchildren, the youngest generation bearing the legacy of that impulsive decision Zachary had made in a dusty town square half a century ago. During the celebration, Marcus stood to make a speech. Now a man of 50 with gray in his own hair, he commanded attention easily. "I want to tell you all a story," he began. "It's a story about how our family began, and it's one I think we should never forget. 50 years ago, my father rode into Manassa looking for supplies. What he found instead was my mother, standing on an auction block, being sold like property to pay her father's debts. He had no obligation to help her. He barely had money to spare. But he saw someone in need and he acted, spending his savings to buy her freedom." The room was silent, everyone listening intently even though most had heard versions of this story before. "But the story doesn't end there," Marcus continued, "because buying someone's freedom is one thing. Treating them with respect, giving them real freedom and choice, falling in love and building a partnership of equals, that's something else entirely. My parents didn't just survive together. They thrived. They built this ranch from almost nothing. They raised 4 children who knew they were loved every single day. They created a legacy that extends to all of us in this room." He turned to face Zachary and Marianne directly. "Dad, you always said that bidding on Mom was the best decision you ever made, but I think it goes deeper than that. The best decision was how you treated her afterward, with respect and kindness and love. The best decision was building a real partnership. The best decision was choosing love every single day for 50 years. There wasn't a dry eye in the room." Zachary felt Marianne's hand squeeze his, and he squeezed back, overcome with emotion at seeing their life reflected back through their son's words. Later that night, alone in their bedroom, Zachary and Marianne prepared for bed with the comfortable familiarity of 5 decades together. "Do you remember what I asked you?" Marianne said as she brushed her hair. "That first day on the ride back to the ranch, I asked why you did it." "I remember," Zachary said. "You asked me why I'd spent that money on you. Do you remember your answer?" He thought back across the years, trying to recall his exact words. "I said I couldn't let you go to Henderson or that other fellow, that I wanted you to be safe." "And I asked what you wanted from me," Marianne continued. "Do you remember what you said?" "I said I hadn't figured it out yet, but that I wouldn't hurt you. Later that evening I asked you again, really asked, pushing for the truth, and your answer broke me, Zachary. Do you remember what you said?" He remembered. The memory was crystal clear despite the passage of time. "I said I wanted you to be safe. That was all." "That was all," she repeated softly. "After a lifetime of men wanting things from me, seeing me as a means to an end, you wanted nothing but my safety. No repayment, no demands, no expectations beyond basic human decency. Your answer broke my heart because it showed me what I'd been missing my entire life, genuine kindness with no strings attached. I fell in love with you in that moment," she continued. "Even though I didn't recognize it yet, even though I told myself it was just gratitude. When you said those words with such simple sincerity, when your answer to why you saved me was just that you wanted me safe, something in my soul recognized its match. You were the man I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." Zachary crossed the room to where she sat and took her hands in his. Even after 50 years, touching her still sent warmth through him. "And I fell in love with you when I saw you on that platform," he said. "Trying so hard to be brave, refusing to let them see your fear. You were magnificent even in your darkest moment. Every day since has only confirmed what I knew then. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and the kindest, and the best partner anyone could ask for. My life began the day I met you, Marianne. Everything before that was just preparation." They held each other close, two people who had beaten the odds and built something lasting and true. Outside their window, the ranch lay peaceful under starlight, a testament to their love and hard work. Inside, surrounded by the evidence of 50 years of partnership, they prepared to sleep, still side by side as they always had been. The years continued to be kind to them. They lived to see their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. The ranch Daniel ran became one of the most successful in the region, a far cry from the struggling operation Zachary had built so long ago. Their legacy spread wider than land and cattle, though. It lived in the values they'd instilled in their children and grandchildren: hard work, kindness, respect for all people regardless of their circumstances, and the belief that love was the most important thing in life. Eventually, as it does for everyone, time began to take its toll. Zachary developed a cough that wouldn't go away, and the doctor from Manassa diagnosed him with a lung condition common in men his age. There was no cure, just a slow decline that they both knew would end only one way. On a beautiful spring morning, surrounded by family, Zachary Kane passed away peacefully in the bed he'd shared with Marianne for over 50 years. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Marianne grieved deeply, but without regret. They'd had 52 beautiful years together, years filled with love and laughter and purpose. She'd been blessed beyond measure, and she knew it. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, passing on stories about Zachary and their early days together. She wanted to make sure future generations knew where they came from, knew the story of how a lonely cowboy and a desperate woman had found each other and built something extraordinary. On a summer evening very much like the one when she'd first arrived at the ranch, Marianne Kane died in her sleep, Emma Sarah Kane by her bedside. She was 76 years old. Her last words, spoken to Emma just before she drifted off, were simple and clear. "Tell them about the love. Tell them it was always about the love." They buried Marianne next to Zachary on a hillside overlooking the ranch, the same spot where they'd often sat together watching sunsets. Their headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, but also a line that summed up their entire story: two souls who saved each other. The ranch continued through Daniel and his children, generation after generation, maintaining the land and the legacy. The story of Zachary and Marianne became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of where they came from and the values they should aspire to. On the 100th anniversary of that fateful day in Manassa, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. They were a huge clan now, dozens of descendants of that couple who'd met so improbably and loved so deeply. Someone had researched and found the exact date. Zachary had bought Marianne's debt, and they'd decided to honor it. The oldest living grandchild, Marcus's daughter Clara, who was now 70 herself, stood to address the gathered family. "100 years ago today," she began, "our grandfather rode into Manassa looking for supplies. Instead, he found our grandmother standing on an auction block. With what amounted to his life savings, he bought her freedom. But more than that, he gave her respect, safety, and love. Together, they built this ranch and this family. Every single person here exists because a lonely cowboy made a brave choice and a desperate woman chose to trust him. Let's never forget that. Let's never forget that love and kindness can change everything. That one good decision can echo through generations." The family cheered and celebrated, honoring the memory of the couple who'd started it all. And perhaps, if such things are possible, Zachary and Marianne knew that their love had endured beyond their own lives, that the decision made in a moment of compassion had blossomed into something that would last for generations, that their story had become the foundation of something greater than themselves. In the end, that's all anyone can hope for. To love and be loved, to build something lasting, to make the world a little better than you found it. And by that measure, Zachary Kane and Marianne Reeves Kane had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Two broken people had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and proved that love, real love built on respect and partnership and genuine affection, could overcome anything. Their story was complete. A good story, a true story, a love story for the ages. And it all began with a simple question and an answer that changed two lives forever. Why did you save me? Because I wanted you to be safe. That was all. And it was everything.